Hello and welcome to this episode of the Historical Fencer podcast. Axel, did that sound like Joe Rogan?
Pull that up, Jamie.
Because you're always complaining that my introductions sound like Joe Rogan.
Yes. Or praise, depending on how you see it. But it feels more like Joe Rogan now because we can sit with our back straight instead of hunching over our sofa.
Yeah, we've moved our studio. Anyway,
the St. Mark's studio and Command Central is also my living room.
Yes. Anyway, today we're going to talk about sparring, and I think that we have a really interesting discussion in store for you. Hope that you enjoy it. Without further ado, let's roll intro.
You are here on a matter of honor. I am here to assure you settle it honorably.
Junkritter Lehrer, Gottlieb haben, Frauen jagen, so next.
I see you handle your weapon well.
I have been known to keep my tip up.
Morning.
Why don't you make it up like a couple of good fellas?
Don't expect these.
You ask for me tomorrow, and you shall find me a grave man.
You ready, gentlemen?
Okay, so let me start off. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. There's one thing especially that makes me really happy, and that is that my place is now a little bit fancier than your place.
Is that correct, though?
No, but it has a nicer view.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does. You have these big, nice wooden houses.
But I have like
late 20th century.
I have like 19th century, really nice. They've got like chandeliers and stuff on the other side, and I've got a nice view of the church and the rooftops. This is a nice place. This is much better than your last place. So we've stepped up in the world. The Historical Fencer podcast is now moving into the posher areas.
Exactly. Well, I do miss the garden, but it's also a much better place to have the podcast. We have a better setup here.
We have a table which isn't
exactly.
knee high. So,
huge upgrades.
Okay, this is very very abstract for our listeners, but I wanted to talk to you about sparring today.
Okay,
and I want to dispel a myth, which is you should wait before you start sparring. That you can't spar to begin with.
Dun dun.
Dun, dun. Right. So, so I should start off with a little story, because I usually take my son to play football every weekend on Sundays usually, and we go to a place called Heden often, which is classic football ground. They play the Gothia Cup. Due to COVID, they're not doing it this year, but it's actually the biggest youth tournament in football tournament.
It's also the place where they used to do military drills.
It is. So we used to actually have a training hall there.
That's right.
Yeah, but anyway, Heden it's a great place. It's like a bunch of football fields, and they play Gothia Cup. Gothia Cup, because it's the biggest youth tournament in football. I think it's actually the biggest youth tournament in anything, because football is probably the biggest sport in the world, right?
Probably true. Let's say it's true.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, so anyway, I was there with my son, and we played some football, and there was a girl there, and she was maybe 15 or 16, and she was really, really good. She had two coaches with her who were, what they were doing was that they were passing her a ball, and she passed it back to them. And on the second pass to her, she turned around and she just, kicked the ball. She was really good. It was like super powerful into a goal. So they were training. I was like, that's a drill. What they're doing, they're drilling a thing, right? So what is it, like a fixed situation? Is that what you say when you train it? Because you used to train football.
A lot.
On a high level, even.
Yes,
yeah. So it's a fixed situation which they're training, and they're drilling that so that they know that this situation is common when you're playing football in her position. So they're training that specifically. But as I was standing there looking at her, I was like, that's training on a very, very high level. Drilling that thing, try to get that thing down to a very high level. That's something that you do when you're good. Most of the time when you're playing football, and like 95% of her football training since she was a kid was doing what me and my son was doing, was just playing football. Most of the time she was sparring, to use our terminology, right? She wasn't drilling. It wasn't like, okay, so you go out and drill a fixed situation. It's playful when you go out and play football. You have a bunch of kids, they go like, screaming, and the parents go like, go out into the football field, here's the ball, have fun, enjoy yourself, come back and wipe your nose in 2 hours and I'll patch your pants together again, and that's it. You wouldn't go out and go like, okay, so we're going to do a drill now.
Not if you are just playing for fun, no.
No.
And even if you go to an organized club, when you start out, they're going to let you, when we talked about this before, they're going to let you play soccer, sparring, as it were, play a match, because that's what's fun. That's what everyone wants to do. And the drilling that you do is always there, but like you can't just force people who want to kick a ball around to only drill.
No, and if you and what they definitely aren't doing is excluding playing football from that, and they just go like, okay, so come on, let's start off with learning how to play football. Let's do all of the minuscule rules, inform you about all of the different rules to begin with, and then we start drilling stuff. You don't do that. You start by just playing football because it's fun. And it's also a sort of a scalable thing. Like you can go out, you can be 5 guys, you can be 10 guys, you can be just you and kicking the ball around. And it isn't like clear cut where the drilling starts and where the sparring.
No, absolutely not. Because you often drill specific situations. You're supposed to get past the defender with a feint, for example. Yeah, it's just that situation, but you're actually doing the feint, and that's just limited sparring. It's the best analogy.
Yeah.
And it works often, in my experience, similar to how we've structured sparring and drilling in GHFS, is that you do drills, then you go up and spar, and when you spar, you notice what you need to work on, then you pause the sparring, go back and drill a specific segment, and then you go back. And my coaches did the exact same thing to us in football or soccer. We were drilling for a while, and this either during one session or over an extended period of time, they noticed what we were lacking. They designed the new drills after that.
Yeah.
Of course, we had long-term goals because we have seasons in football. You don't have that in fencing, really. But otherwise, the way it works is pretty similar to how we structure it in our club.
Yeah. So the myth here, and one that has been said for, I don't know, since the dawn of HEMA, I guess, is that, you shouldn't start sparring too early. And people still say that, like, okay, so you need to learn a few things before, otherwise you'll ingrain the wrong things into your muscle memory, and you'll do things wrong, and that's I'm just going to say it. It's a shit way of looking at it.
Okay, I want to challenge you a little bit, because there is an element of truth to that. It's just I don't think it has been applied the right way. This comes from, I think, 2 sources. One is people's familiarity with Asian martial arts, which is, at least in their mind, very structured around drilling and perfection of technique. And then they just translated that mindset, which might be right or might be wrong, but it translated that into historical fencing. And the other thing is that people saw sparring in the early days of historical fencing and rightfully noticed that it looked like shit. But then they drew the wrong conclusion as to why that were.
Yeah, I think you're definitely wrong there. The reason it looked like shit was that because they didn't spar primarily, they drilled primarily. That's why it was looking like shit. That's my analysis of it. But
I wasn't denying that. I was saying that they thought they needed more drilling instead of more sparring, or better structured drills. They were more sparring-like, and I don't think that many instructors really knew how to do that at all.
No, that's probably correct. I think that the idea here is that if you're if you're drilling and you're not sparring, and that's the problem with this, is that the drill that she did on the football field was, like you said, it had a context, which was playing football. She knew what it was that she was drilling. If you don't know what you don't have the context because you're not sparring. Sparring is the context for which you're doing drills. And sparring is a simulation of something else, right? So we're trying to do, that's a whole different discussion, I guess. But the drills are meant to set you up for a specific thing. But if you don't have the context, what are you learning? It's like learning how to catch a ball by just catching an imaginary ball. Someone is just, okay, so imagine there's a ball. Now raise your hand at 45 degrees and clutch your fingers. No, you're doing it wrong. It doesn't, no. And then you've got that perfect, movement of catching a ball in the air, which looks exactly like the instructor is telling you to do. And then someone just throws you a really hard ball and it hits you in the face and you don't actually know how to catch a ball at all.
Yeah.
And that's basically how I view it.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I always get the best results. Of course, with the low number of students, 1 to 2 to 4 students maybe, but where the drills are usually very, very loose, and where more or less they are sparring with me. If you understand the difference, I'm not really sparring with them because I'm setting up situations for them, and I'm just feeding them information and feedback and situations as they go. So it feels like it is sparring for them, but I'm looking for certain things.
Yeah.
And that's. You always get the best results like that. And the only times I don't do that is when people are specifically asking to do a lot of drilling because they so much enjoy going into the details. Fine, but then you have a different goal.
Yeah.
I think like 2 weeks ago, we have on Thursdays we have beginners class before advanced class. And when the beginner class was over, 2 guys, Omar and Kalle, stayed behind because their instructor allowed them to pick up 2 foam swords and just spar. So I joined them, and we sparred for about 2 hours, I think, just one after the other, 2-3 points. And I was just setting these situations up, and then feeding them a little information every single time. And not to toot my own horn, it's the method. They made huge amount of progress in just 2 hours because I've seen them before. Like I know what they can and can't do.
Yeah.
And we were just sparring and then refining everything around it, and that is the best way of doing things. Like you can also allude to Arturo Camargo's article on historicalfantasy.com that he published yesterday, 2 days ago.
2 days ago, yeah.
And most of the examples he brings up historically the advice is pick up a stick, put out some armor, find a guy who's good at fighting, and go out fight 2 times a day, 2 hours every time, and you just learn while you're doing it.
Yeah, exactly. So the other thing is there's been quite a few studies actually showing that if you want to learn something, it's better if you have fun. So like having fun is a great motivator, and that's why they don't get the kids to start doing drilling or remove the sparring bit of football, soccer practice to you Americans. Because that it's not as fun. You have to have fun while you're training, and sparring is fun. That's a really important motivator, of course. And drilling, if you're just doing drilling, if you're standing in the front of a class with 20 students and you're just drilling, it's a high likelihood that a good percentage of them will not find enjoyment in doing that. They'll be bored.
They have no idea what they're looking for to begin with.
Yeah.
I mean, as a kid playing football, even if we were supposed to practice specific skills like feints or voids, they set that up as a game for us, when you were a child.
Yeah.
Like we're going to play catch.
Yeah.
And you're training the exact same skills that you use in a football game, but now it's a little fun competition play thing.
Yeah. That's good because that's what I wanted to get at. How to set up drills as gamifying certain aspects of sparring so that you're blurring the lines between drilling and sparring. But before we talk about that, there's actually another thing that I wanted to say about the history of that myth, is that I think that the real reason why it's there is that early HEMA looked at training as a way of going through the manuscripts, and that's how you're teaching it. Like there's a point in doing that. There's a point of that, but it has to have its place. Like you have to look at the manuscripts as a teaching method of doing things. Like these are important aspects of technicalities which are good for you in the context of fencing. But if you're just going through the motions because they need to sort of like anally retentively just go through all of the different things, it's not in context.
No, then you're not recreating a martial art or training to fight. You are reenacting an historical document.
Yes.
And one trap that I think we all fell into, especially when it comes to the German longsword tradition, is that we trained the techniques based on how much was written about them. But you write more about the super advanced stuff. You know, you write little about the basic stuff. But you should always practice the basic stuff more than the advanced stuff. So many people all over the world were practicing super complex Auswinden with a backflip in second tempo, instead of just going hängen Oberhau a lot. And having that as a baseline for setting up more advanced techniques.
Yeah.
And we all fell into that trap.
We did, but it's also this thing, like you can do drills which are based on what's written, which are super advanced things, and you can find skills, you can get skills coming out of that as long as you have at least, 50% sparring time of your training time. Like you should, if you're sparring, if you're doing drills for 30 minutes during your training, and you're doing other stuff like super advanced drills, I mean like a fixed situation thing, like if you have an hour of sparring, I think that's probably a good sort of ratio. You shouldn't do more than those advanced drills for that thing.
No, and I mean it's important to remember that 1 hour of sparring doesn't need to be 1 hour of full contact, full target, full speed, competitive sparring. That's not what it is, right?
No.
It's much more nuanced than that.
Yeah. So I think that's an important thing, because maybe we could talk a bit about what sparring really is and because we said we're blurring the lines a bit between drilling and sparring. So is there a line there between where how do you break it down? Like football is scalable. You can play one person kicking a ball into the net. You play two people where it's 1-on-1. One is a goalie. You can play 5 people. You just split up and into teams or something, and you can play a full football match. And you can do drills which are sort of gamifications of sparring. So how would that look? Like how would you approach sparring?
Well, I think just from the top of my head, because I haven't thought about that much, but once you have any opportunity to make choices, you are also sparring to some extent. Like a classical drill I know that Christian Rukkonen likes to do is that you are sparring, but you can both only use Zornhau. Yeah. That's the only technique that you're allowed to use. Diagonal cut with the long edge from above, long sword. But you still have the option of from what distance to make the attack, and from if you want to make it to initiate or to counter strike, and all that thing. So then you're also learning sparring elements that are not technical per se.
Yeah,
and I'm not saying that exercises where you don't have choices are not useful. It's super useful to do very advanced, longer series of techniques like Joachim Meier-Stücke or some long kata in Japanese swordsmanship. Absolutely, it's really, really important. But somewhere there, when you can start making clear choices, you're both in technique or drilling and in sparring territory.
So if you'd make the sort of if you say like, okay, so let's where do you draw the how do you adapt? This is what I want to say. How do you adapt sparring to not just be free fighting? Like how do you do that? What are the different ways?
Well, you can limit the targets, obviously. You can limit the techniques that you're allowed to use. You can limit how many actions you have in every exchange. All of these to reach certain goals, and you can also set it up in, for example, who has initiative or not. A very common thing is to exclude the thrust or to only use thrusts, for example, or to only allow hits to the head. I mean, that's a classic, also historical example, and it's all done to practice certain skills.
You could you could do symmetrically and asymmetrically. So you have both have the same limitations, or you have different limitations. So one thing that I like to do is if someone has a problem with taking the initiative and starting an engagement, I tell the student you have to initiate the engagement in this sparring. You can't wait, and then maybe the other person are like, you have to parry 3 times before you counter.
This is actually one of the most popular classes we have taught in Sweden and abroad. Has been coaching and sparring, which deals exactly with this.
Yeah,
it's hugely popular. But this is when you are the teacher. When it's just me, I always, then it's a mindset. I mean, I can always ask my sparring partner to agree to certain limits or something. Or I will tell him or her what I intend to do and ask them to do certain things. But mostly it's just my own mindset. And it always starts out with playfulness. As you talked about earlier, it has to be enjoyable, it has to be playful, and it has to be fun. And I try to always approach my sparring in that, and that's simply to increase technical variation. And this also means that you're going to have to think that it's fun to get hit more, because that's what's going to happen. Yeah. But I have great sessions on Sundays now, for example, where we meet up a bunch of people in the club and just free spar. Yeah. And it's always just trying to overcome certain solutions and overcome certain situations and be smart about it. And it's very enjoyable and it's very, very developing. But then you can't have the attitude of I have to win at all counts. Then you're not going to go anywhere, because you're going to keep doing the same techniques over and over again. You're going to start adding strength and speed, and there's absolutely no point in doing that really if you're not gearing up for a competition. Yeah. Instead, try to find technical or like tactical solutions to the problems that you're facing.
Yeah, and I was listening to watching a YouTube video about sparring in boxing and MMA, for example, and how much do they spar in a week? And the thing with that, if you're looking at what they're doing, is often light sparring.
Oh yes.
So it's not full on sparring. Like, it's an adaptation of the game, so that you get some of that. Like, sometimes you have to go full on, because otherwise you won't know what it is to be hit hard, or you won't know how exhausted you get when you're hitting the other guy hard and you're having to deal with getting punched in the stomach or kicked in the head hard, so there's something, but you can't do that all the time, because if you do that in boxing or MMA, there's a high risk of you sustaining brain injuries, right?
Yeah, and for the casual practitioner, you got to go to work tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. But you do it once in a while. But most of the sparring is pretty light, and you're touching the other one. Okay, so he got me there. I need to keep my guard up. I need to improve my cardio. You're drawing information from those things, right?
Yeah.
And you're adapting your level to your partner.
Yeah. When I've done Muay Thai or MMA, I remember one class we would do knees to the stomach for 2 minutes. Where you would just have your arms around my neck and you would just launch knees. And you were practicing knees, and I was practicing just tensing my gut. and it's pretty brutal, especially at the end of like a 2-hour session. But then after that, we went into and did light sparring. So then you had both, and we never did much hardcore sparring, if you know what I mean. It was usually always light and technical, and you had the coach there walking around making sure that people did it that way, and everyone quickly figured out what light sparring meant.
Yeah. I told you the story about my boxing club that I trained with, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think I've talked about it in the podcast.
Probably only 5 times by now.
Oh, okay. I'll skip it then. But yeah. So the sparring in boxing and MMA is, I think, it's harder to do full contact sparring in MMA and boxing. And boxing probably, they do it more than MMA. That's my view on it. I think that boxing probably go full on more than they do in MMA for various reasons. Maybe it's cultural, or maybe it's because there's a greater risk of injury in MMA, and boxing is sort of a smaller system in fighting. So...
but they also put on extra padding.
Oh, they do, yeah.
It's legs and head and so on and whatnot. So we don't have any system for that in historical fencing. We don't put on extra gear when it's time to free spar. If you're already wearing the gear that you are
Yeah,
the same gear we use to spar, we use for competition. In boxing, you spar with headgear, for example, but you don't wear it when you go up and fight.
No, that's true.
Pro.
But my point was really that since we can't even light spar if we're using steel weapons, usually, so we can do sparring, but you have to pull your cuts. You have to, if you're not wearing a mask, because the risk of poking an eye out is greater. So we're sort of, our baseline is usually with a higher level of is that my phone?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, so we're wearing more gear, and we're having the fewer sort of hard hits to the head that will rock our brains. So it's easier for us to actually go full contact.
Yeah, it's just that equipment failure is more catastrophic for us than it is in boxing.
Yes, I guess.
That's the only difference.
Yeah. But we were talking about like boxing as a sort of a more confined version of fighting, so that you've taken out a lot of targets and a lot of techniques, and you're only allowed to do a various variations of these punches, and then you can't kick, and you have to do them in a certain way. Like you can't do a hammer fist to the back of the head or punch him in the groin. So you've limited targets, and you've taken out most of the techniques, and that's a sort of a sportification of fighting. Like these are the important things that we think of. And then in fighting, we want to drill those, and we've turned those into sparring. If a boxer gets into a fight, he has a huge advantage over almost everyone up until he gets to the ground, where he's just like any guy, maybe more fit, right? So that's another thing. Like what you're doing in sparring is, you can gamify that and drill certain things, right? And I think that, for example, sport fencers, they've done that. So we think that right of way is a really important aspect of fencing, and thrusting, if we're not talking about saber, is the most important thing in fencing. So, and being quick forward and backwards is really important. So we're using a piste. You're limiting the way that you're sparring in order to get really, really good at specific things, and that takes you a long way, because you're becoming expert. If you're picking the right things, you're becoming an expert at that.
Yeah, and it has become its own art. I mean, you can say that boxing or Muay Thai and wrestling together is a complete martial art, but you separate them to practice different skills, they become arts on their own. And sport fencing then is a bit similar.
Yeah, but the thing with sport fencing is that it's really fun, and you can do it. Like most of the training in sport fencing is done just going to 5 points or whatever it is. Yeah. So you start off as a kid. You can start when you're really, really small. As long as you can hold up the foil, you can participate, and most of the training will actually be you fencing.
Yeah. And in historical fencing, you always have this aesthetic or interpretational aspect to it that you don't have in modern fencing, in sport fencing. But I'm honestly not so sure that has to be on everyone's mind all the time, especially not for kids, or people who begin. Like if you teach them well enough and you drill them well enough and you let them spar, their fencing won't look bad because they will be good fencers. I also think we need to reconsider that aspect a little bit.
Yeah.
Fencing can look horrible in competition and people are just bouncing in for points, but fencing can also look absolutely beautiful in competition when people are applying techniques and strategies.
Yeah, and I think that if you're sticking a sword in the hands of a kid and you tell him or her to just swing it around and move with it and have fun with it, he's learning more important principles than if you're saying stand like this in this guard, do the cut exactly like this. So it's better to just stick to foam swords in the hands of kids and let them have fun with it and then you patch them up when they're a bit bruised and wipe their tears.
Yeah,
that's not out of the way, and that's a better way of training.
Yeah, I mean that's how there are millions and millions of kids in the world who play with swords, but only a few thousand who do it in a historical fencing club. Yeah. All the other millions are doing it the way you just described, and they are loving it.
Yeah. That's how we all got into it, right?
Yeah.
Like, here's a stick. What can I do with it? I can beat this lamppost with it. Hey, there's my friend.
hello, lamppost. Yeah.
Yeah, and like it's an age-old thing. Like, that's what's this kid's name? I might be confusing two stories here, but there's 1,000 years a Viking kid in Novgorod. What's his name?
I don't forgot, but the one who drew pictures of his dad or something up on a horse.
Yeah. And he wants to be a warrior, and he likes doesn't like his own work, but he likes fighting with sticks and stuff. And
we can all relate.
Yeah, it's just 1,000-year-old kid doing the same stuff that every kid has done since and long before that.
Also, what was the Ewart Oakeshott, the guy who did the typology for swords?
Yeah,
when he had to define what he thought about martial arts, in historical times. This hyper academic guy, he said, "Well, fighting is fun. That's the thing. Fighting is really, really fun. Yeah. That's why we keep on doing it forever."
Yeah.
So again, it's the playfulness of it.
Yeah, it's actually that's pretty true. I got into a fight in the street a couple of months ago. I told you about this. Yeah, it was a couple of guys beating a woman, actually, and I was on a motorcycle. I jumped off and I got involved, and they weren't very physical, so it was basically me having a ball and throwing people around until the police came, and I didn't tell the police, but I told a friend of mine who's a BJJ black belt. I said, I told him about the story, and I said, I couldn't tell the police, but I was really enjoying myself. And he was like, "Yeah, fighting is so much fun when you're winning," which is true.
That is true. But it says something about how useful and valuable it is for people in general all over the world to have an outlet for that.
Yeah,
because it's a great way. I mean, self-development, yes. Discipline, yes. Getting to know yourself, yes. Camaraderie, yes. All these are super important aspects. But if you want a simple way of having a lot of fun, just fight.
Yeah,
fight with your friends.
Yeah, and here's the thing. The only martial art that isn't that's pretty a decent martial art, which isn't sparring, is shooting.
Naval bombardment is hard to spar.
Naval bombardment is a great martial art. It is very efficient. It's hard to spar with it, but you can probably simulate it. I guess that's some sort of sparring. But shooting is you can spar with it. Maybe a lot of people who are into shooting would benefit from becoming better by actually, simulating, by using simulation or whatever. But apart from that, there's not a martial art on this planet which I think is worth its salt, which isn't focused primarily on sparring. Sparring is a huge deal. Any martial art who says, "Oh, my techniques are so lethal, so I can't spar," I'm going I want to fight that guy. Okay, so you're into this sort of.
Didn't you have one? You've told me another story that you haven't told on this podcast about the early days of GHFS, where you bonked a guy with a wooden waster in the head because he was doing some.
It was the arm, actually. Yeah, he was into. I don't want to sort of name the martial art he was in, but he was. We rented a hall from them for a while, and there was this guy who came in, and he was very, very mysterious, and he said he was very well practiced in armed martial arts. So we were going to spar, and we had wooden wasters, because this was the early days. That's how we sparred. We had wooden wasters before the shinais. It was just wooden swords.
Slightly touched up baseball bats.
Yeah, exactly. Sword-shaped baseball bats. And I said, like, you want to gear up a bit? And we weren't wearing a lot of gear. It was, a patchwork of gear from other things. Mostly like soft protection, which didn't really protect us from hard hits. And he was like, no, my gi is very protective. I was like, okay. And I saluted him, and we were supposed to start sparring, and he was just standing there with, his eyes semi-closed, like waiting for me to do something. And I walked up to him and smacked him over the arm. And he was like, ow, 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 ow. And he immediately just quit. He just walked out, and he was not used to the pain. He didn't even, attempt to protect himself. He didn't parry, he didn't do anything. I don't know what he thought would be coming from me in that situation, but it was me just, hitting him sort of semi-hard on the arm, and that was it. He went out, he put his arm in underwater, and he never came to spar with us. He continued with his own martial art.
Yeah, and that's sad, because you feel bad for him, because he was under an impression that he had skills that he did not have.
Yeah,
and there are a bunch of people who think that, and not only are they lying to themselves or being lied to, but they don't experience the actual absolute hilarious fun of doing real sparring.
Exactly.
Yeah, it just
scares them.
Yeah, and like you can get a long way with really intense and hard drilling. I mean, there are, like, I've seen Bujinkan done like that, and other martial arts, and there are martial arts that don't have practical application at its goal, like Tai Chi, for example. So, like, it's not a knock on them, but if you claim to have actual fighting skills and you don't have any sort of sparring incorporated into your training, you need to rethink that probably. Looking at every military training, I think, across the world, there are choices when they drill. They don't stand and look into the sunset before they go and hunt terrorists or whatever. They don't do that. Maybe they do that also.
They do it afterwards.
they for sure spar in some way. Oh, I just have a funny story, because you mentioned that he said that his gi was protection enough. The gi can actually be protection enough. The first Swordfish 2010, where we had steel weapons.
Yeah.
One of our favorite guys, Staffan Sannemal.
Oh yeah.
He participated, and he is 120 kilos. He's a big guy, and this was before the Spess, actually Peterson fencing jacket, was on the market. It came like 2 years later. So people had, again, whatever we could dig up, old gambesons and stuff like that. Yeah. And he wanted to fight, and we love him, so we also wanted him to fight. But we tried to put on a gambeson, and they were all too small. And eventually Scott Heldroth put on his gambeson, and Staffan is about twice the size of Scott, and then duct taped the gambeson to stay on Staffan's body.
Yeah.
And he still tore it apart and just fell off him as soon as he flexed his muscles. So we just looked at each other and said, well, his gi is black, so it looks a little bit as a gambeson from the distance. Yeah. We just put that on, and then no one talks about this, and I just hope he makes it through. And he made it through just fine.
Yeah. He's also the guy who straightened his own dislocated finger.
Oh yeah, and just laughed and went on.
He also straightened another guy's dislocated arm.
Yeah, during the live stream.
Yeah. There were 3 guys in the audience who fainted when they saw that, actually.
And he is actually a ninja.
He is a ninja. But here, I met Staffan the first time. Hi, Staffan, if you're listening to this.
We miss you.
We miss you. We met the first time in a stick fighting competition. And there were these stick fighting guys who they called me up and said, you want to join a stick fighting competition? And I was like, sure, I'll do that. Got my butt handed to me, to be honest. And their plan the whole time was that there are these knights out. They're training knightly arts. Yeah, and there are ninjas out there too. I want to get the ninja and the knight in the same competition.
The Staffan does some sort of Asian martial art. That's basic.
Yeah. So that's a hilarious. That was their setup. They wanted the ninja. They wanted to see a fight between a ninja and a knight, and we didn't actually get the fight because it was like the lottery. I think, but and that's also well, this is a sneaky thing that I figured out afterwards. They told me, like, you shouldn't fight in the middleweight competition. You should fight in the heavyweight competition. I weighed 80 kilos at the time. And I was like, why? Well, the middleweight is actually tougher than the heavyweight. And their whole reason for telling me to fight in the heavyweight division was probably because Staffan was definitely not in the middleweight competition. So I went up there, and I remember I fought a guy. He weighed 100 kilos plus. And in the video, he was just pushing me around and throwing me around. He knew I was technical. He told me afterwards. He knew that I was technical, so he didn't want to stay out of distance because he knew that I would smack him at distance. So he ran in and he ran over me. And there's this part of that video when he's pushing me out of frame of the video camera. So I'm pushing him out of the. Because I just wanted to retaliate. Let's get this. I'm going to get this guy. And I'm pushing him out of the view of the camera. And then I come flying back in. I'm flying into frame. But it was a great fun. But that was the Staffan is he's one of those guys who'll he wants to spar. He wants to fight.
Yeah, he actually his instructor I think told him that you should go and you should spar with all the different kind of martial arts that you can in order to increase your skills.
That's great, and
we've seen him increase his skills tremendously over the years because of that attitude. So, and there was no really strong thinking about rules or technique specifics, but he learned a lot, and you hear that all the time. Historical examples of the father telling his son, go out and train with whoever you can if you can't find a good one, or Lichtenauer traveling.
Lichtenauer, I was just about to say.
So, yeah, and training with all these different people in all the different countries. And that's also why you joined the stick fighting competition, because that wasn't pause after each break. That was 2 rounds of just whacking each other with no stop.
Yeah,
and you
continuous fencing.
Continuous fencing, yeah, and you learned a lot from that.
I did it twice. The second tournament, I actually came in 3rd. You know how? I didn't win a single match. Do you know how? Because the other people were so beat up or just broken down from the pain that they forfeited their matches. They was like, I can't take anymore. So I actually
they don't do those competitions anymore. I think I haven't heard about it at least.
Well, they're still training.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Do you know that Staffan's dad is, or I don't know if he did, but he liked to dress in Western clothing. It's a thing sometimes on the countryside in Sweden with the hat and the boots. Yeah. So we could introduce him as Ninja, son of cowboy. It was one of the best presentations ever.
Oh, yeah. Brilliant. We're sort of veering off the topic of sparring, but it's related because any person I know who's good at fencing or developing is doing sparring at some level. Like, otherwise, what you're doing, if you're doing martial art without any type of sparring, without any sort of competitive element where you're testing yourself against an uncooperative opponent, it's dancing.
Yeah, and I've also never experienced sparring or in fencing or in any other martial art that has been detrimental to me. The experience is the experience. I think you can make the decision yourself if you're going to continue to do something bad or if you're going to change. Like the only thing that can happen is your approach. If it's constantly like a competitive approach, or if you're like angry or vengeful when you're up there, then you probably might not learn that much. Otherwise, no. And I've had some real tough challenges when I was been out teaching, and you're going to teach for the weekend, and people are happy because there's an instructor from abroad coming, so they all want to fight you, and I always agree basically to fight. So if you after teaching for 2 days straight, you're gonna be sparring with 10 or 12 people, you have no idea what approach they have coming in. Some of them just want to exchange and have fun. Some of them just want to hit you somewhere and say, I hit Axel, he's not that good. Yeah. Some of them are really good themselves. Some of them are just brutes. And you have to immediately adapt your own style to them. I always start up being playful. And then if I see what they are, and we can talk about it, but then I change after them. And that has been so valuable to me to step up in those situations. Because I learned so much how to read the opponents and then also just to change my own sparring completely.
Yeah. Are you approaching it as a learning game or as a status game? There's that guy Naval who talks about wealth and stuff like that, and he makes a distinction between wealth is not a zero-sum game. Like everyone can win. He uses the example if you're building houses, the more people who buy houses, the cheaper houses are, and everyone can have a house. Like if it's a zero-sum game, it's a status game.
Yeah.
You're trying to only one person can be on top, right? You can be the top dog. If you're approaching sparring like a status game, you're doing it slightly wrong at least.
Yeah, and you're not doing yourself any favors because anyone can luck in a hit on you in fencing. This is not BJJ where the better guy like basically always wins.
Yeah.
You can double anyone if you want to.
Yeah.
So if you're going to be the guy that never gets hit, and you're going to be disappointed when you do get hit, you're going to have a lot of problems.
Yeah. So there's the competitive element to training in sparring, because we're not talking about competitions here. We're talking about sparring,
yes.
How you approach that. And that's a different thing. Competitions is a zero-sum game, and that's sort of the value of it, that you get to see how well all of your training panned out and what that meant in your sort of ranking against others. It's a good thing. Like, and there's that competitive element to sparring as well, which is why sparring is valuable. But there's also the aspect of you not learning if you're taking anything as a loss of status when you're losing.
Yeah, and you're going to be a pain to be around, man. No one's going to want to train with you if that's your attitude. Because you're going to have that feeling. It's going to come bubbling up when you're up there. And I mean, someone hits you really well. It hurts like hell to get hit somewhere.
Yeah.
And then you start feeling the feeling of aggression or the need to retaliate.
Yeah.
And if you haven't sparred much, you might get consumed by that feeling. And you're going to start fencing in a way you don't like, and you're going to maybe act in a way that people don't appreciate. It's better if you're really used to sparring and competing. You're going to feel that's emotion coming up, and then you can check it and control it, and you maintain the playfulness of it.
And that's the opportunity to learn from losing.
Yeah,
like it's getting better yourself. So every time you lose, you actually have been presented with an opportunity to learn. So that's the way of doing it. And the good thing is that you can both learn from sparring, or you should, or you're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
So even regardless of where you're doing, and this has to do with a lot of sort of mental aspects that people are fighting. When they're fearing of their fear of losing, their fear of getting hurt, their fear of all these different things. That's a good way of thinking of it for an instructor, because the instructor can then sort of guide people through it, make them adjust to sparring by gearing up, going slow, saying like you don't have to be afraid of this. We can just use foam weapons and just guide them, take the beginner by the hand and guide them. And almost everyone that I know has had, with the first time someone is striking them, they're tensing up their entire body. No one is relaxed the first time someone tries to hit you with a sword. You're going to be tense. You're going to be, everything just sort of shut down. You get tunnel vision and you're not doing what you're supposed to do. So you have to adapt and adjust to it. And the only way of doing that is by sparring. Doing it more and more, but you can sort of do it baby steps. You can start with foam weapons.
Yeah, or very limited techniques. I often do that with students. I'm only going to hit you from above, to right or left. Nothing. No, I won't thrust you or anything like that. I'm going to telegraph a little bit just to get him used to it.
Yeah,
and you take it from there.
Yeah. So that's. There was something else I wanted to bring up. Yeah, you said in the beginning that one of the things with sparring, with the drills. What was it that you said about the drills?
Something brilliant, I assume.
No, it was dumb. It was dumb. It was really, really dumb. I don't remember now. I'll get back to it.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you think that kids can spar with steel?
I've never tried it, but I'd assume that would work out fine. I mean, you can look at videos from Jogo de Pau, the Portuguese stick fighting from the 70s. They're doing hyper intense drills, but they're not. The kids are wearing no protection whatsoever.
Yeah,
and they have perfect control over that. So if kids can do that, I think they could spar with steel too. But I mean, with what weapon? How old are the kids? And so on.
Yeah.
With what gear? But I can't see why it wouldn't be possible.
Oh, so when is the when is a good time? Okay, so we don't even have the kids swords in steel, I think.
No, we don't have kids gear for swords either. So and the bones are much smaller and fragile. So I don't know if it's how it will work. But in theory, I guess so. But also in theory, I also don't see why they would necessarily have to fight with steel. They will. As a kid, they get a long way with foam weapons on nylons as well.
Yeah, but they can do drills with steel.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we often think the kids don't have the control that they actually do.
I think that here's another story about my son. He's got a friend they like to play fight, and he was like, "Dad, look at all my bruises on my legs." I was like, "Who are you? You can't, why are you getting into fights?" I was like, no, it's me and Jonas. We like doing it. And I was like, what are you, how does he feel about you hitting him that hard? And he was like, no, sometimes I get hurt and sometimes he gets hurt. It's all good. but when I see them play fight, they're actually quite controlled. Like they don't, like when he fences with me, for example, he just swings crazy, hits me hard. But when he's fighting with his friends, it's much more controlled, and they know where that. And that's the good thing of wrestling and fighting and doing all that. When you're a kid, like you're actually learning the limits. You're learning that you can sometimes lose, you can sometimes win, and even if you're better, you can actually adapt to the other person's level so that they're comfortable with it. You can play with it. It's just a natural thing, right?
It is. I mean, now that you got me thinking about it, I would say that, like, as I mentioned earlier, the consequences of equipment failure can be pretty severe in historical fencing. Whereas the more blunt impact of boxing or wrestling, they carry a different kind of risk, but not the same risk.
Yeah.
I mean, one way of minimizing that risk would be, for example, that you don't thrust. And that's something that I often do with beginners too. You ignore that part because they have more of a tendency to just walk straight into it. So there are plenty of ways that you can work with this.
Yeah. So we touched upon this before with the drill, which I call the spar drill spar. That's ties into the limitations of limiting sparring and how you're approaching sparring. Is that what you do is that you take, if you're a coach, you're an instructor, you take a student and you spar with them, and then you try to figure out what they're doing, a pattern that they're doing. And you just make a drill out of something which would break that pattern. Or if you can see a weakness, like, okay, so I'm successfully hitting this guy on his left arm. I can set him up so that I get that cut in every time. All right, so then you take a break and you're saying, okay, so this is what I'm doing. I'm striking you here. Do you notice that? Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna go 3 cuts at you, and then I'm gonna cut you on your left arm, and you parry that. All right. So because usually it's due to a flaw in their technique, right? It's when they're exposing that thing, and you put that into a drill. And when you've done that for a couple of minutes, 5 minutes, you go back into sparring, and you don't focus necessarily on doing that. But sometime during that sparring, you start going whack, and you try to get that again, and then you drill it. You go back and forth until you cannot actually hit that person on that spot, and that's how you coach someone. And use drills, and that's how drills should be used. The material that we're reading, the sources, their input from the old masters into these situations, right? What they're saying is, okay, so you've struck someone and he parried it, and if he's weak, then you do this. If he's strong, then you do this. It's a drill, that can be drilled down. but you have to have the sparring as a context for that. So if you're sparring, if that's the basic of your training, like sport fencing, what they're doing, 95% of their training time is actually doing fencing matches. And then you see, okay, so I end up in this situation where I'm striking and he always parries that. What can I do from there? Do I always strike around to the other side? Maybe I could do a deepen. I never get the deepen to work. Okay, let's drill that until it works. You know? So that's how you should be using the drills as a part of your sparring. It's not two different things. It's you tie them together and then you make them not a way of learning the manuscripts, but a way of developing the fencer to become a better fencer. You know, who cares if you can remember all of the techniques in the manuscript if you can't perform them in a sort of in a way which would work against an opponent. Okay, so you can do them slowly in a drill. Okay, good. You're dancing.
Yeah, I don't think the historical masters would have that approach. They would start with, it would be actual skills.
Yeah.
They wouldn't start with a corpus that you dry swim through,
No.
I doubt that.
They're not like not throwing balls.
Yeah.
You're starting with, here's a ball, catch it, go out, play with it, do something, have fun. Or maybe not have fun necessarily, but, fence. Yeah. So, yeah. Interesting. So, have we dispelled this myth? You can't spar with to begin with?
I think so. People should definitely reconsider, at least if they have of that opinion. Just challenge yourself a little bit. Think about ways you can do it. That is safe enough for your requirements, and that is useful for your requirements. Don't think of it sparring as only full contact, full target, a competitive bout. It's not what it is.
Yeah,
there's so much variation to it.
Yeah, there truly is. So the girl in the football field. I think for me she's a very good sort of analogy for what we should be doing. Like when you're doing drills which are specific, teaching you something specific, but the context is the playing football, the game. Without that, what are you even drilling?
Yeah.
You don't know. You can't know. You need to know. Yeah. Okay, so is that it? Did we just cover all of sparring in under an hour?
In under an hour, for sure. I think we'll come back and revisit this topic.
Yeah, we should. We should bring someone who doesn't like sparring.
Why don't we do like debate blood matches on this pod? We bring in people that we have completely different opinions with, or two guys who have completely different opinions, and we just go all out. That'll be fun.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
We should be sparring them though first.
What?
So just
that too, for sure.
So that we know that we can take them. I mean, yeah. Okay, so I didn't remember what it was that I forgot that you said that was stupid before. But yeah.
We'll come back to it. I'm not surprised.
Okay. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. If you want to get updates on when we release new episodes or articles on the historicalfencer.com, sign up for getting an email notification. You can also follow us on Facebook and all of that stuff. And we still have a Patreon site which you can give us your hard-earned money in these pandemic times. But as usual, we're not doing it for money. We're doing it because we like doing it, I guess.
We love fencing.
Yeah.
And it's fun. That's it.
So have fun, enjoy yourself, stay safe, or reasonably safe. Don't be too safe. Don't be a chicken. Have fun and enjoy your life. All right. Over and out from us.
Goodbye.
You are here on a matter of honor. I am here to assure you settle it honorably.
Junkritte Lehrer, Gottlieb haben, Frauen jagen, so extra.
I see you handle your weapon well.
I have been known to keep my tip up.
Morning.
Why don't you make it up like a couple of good fellows?
Don't expect decency. You ask for me tomorrow, and you shall find me a grave man.
You ready, gentlemen?